Violence in Ukraine. Amid signs both sides are ready for more talks, the Holy Father weighs in. State of the Union speech. President Joe Biden defends his time thus far in the White House. We have analysis including what he said about abortion. Coronavirus crisis. New developments in the fight against COVID-19. We have reaction from a former Surgeon General. And Ash Wednesday. As we begin Lent, a look at how artwork can inspire our journey towards Easter. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, March 2nd, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight on this Ash Wednesday. I'm Tracy Sable. As the military conflict between Russia and Ukraine enters its 7th day, there are signs that both sides are ready for more talks regarding a ceasefire. For now, the assault on the city of Kharkiv continues. Russian forces target a police station and intelligence headquarters. Meantime, thousands of people are fleeing into neighboring countries. Pope Francis thanked the Polish people this morning for their generosity in welcoming Ukrainian refugees. During his weekly meeting with pilgrims, the Holy Father expressed his gratitude to Poland, saying, "You are generously offering everything refugees need to live in dignity despite the drama of the moment." EWTN Newsroom correspondent Colm Flynn joins us now from Poland. Colm, great to see you. I want to talk about what the Pope said this morning, but first, could you talk to us about the situation at the border and what you have seen during these days in Poland?
Well, a very good evening, Tracy, from the Ukrainian border in the southeast of Poland. I'm here in an area called Medyka, where tens of thousands of refugees from Ukraine have been crossing the border in a steady stream behind me all day into Poland. And the situation here is just incredible. The Polish government has announced that since the crisis began, they think that over 500,000 refugees, Ukrainian refugees, have now entered Poland. Now, we'll speak about Pope Francis's comments today in just a moment, but something that the Pope did say is that the outpouring of support from the Polish people has just been incredible for these, many of them families, many women and children who have been crossing the border and not knowing what is coming next in their lives or what kind of Ukraine they'll be returning home to. We've been going to some of the neighbouring towns and villages across the border for the entire day, speaking with those refugees. And again, like I said, many women and children who told me that their husbands, their brothers, the men in the family have remained in Ukraine to protect their homes and to fight the Russian government. But the Polish people here, as I speak to you, there are cars all around me of local people, local Polish people who are coming to collect the refugees who they do not know, to bring them wherever they need to go. So the ones we were talking to today said that they were bringing them to train stations, bus stations. One man picked up a family and he was ready to drive them 7 hours to another Polish city. Just to my right, Tracy, there's a grocery store here where they are bringing in the refugees, allowing them to sleep in sleeping bags on the floor. They've been giving food and supplies and SIM cards. Caritas, the Catholic charity as well, coordinating much of this massive humanitarian outreach.
So wonderful to see all those signs of hope in Poland. Can we go back again to what the Pope said this morning?
He made a statement saying that they were an example to the world because not only were they opening their borders, but they were opening their hearts to these refugees.
Yeah, and Colm, I know that Pope Francis called for a day of prayer and fasting for Ukraine today. Can you talk to us more about that?
That's right, Tracy. This was something that the Pope called for initially last Wednesday, less than 24 hours after this crisis began. And he reminded people that it was coming up at the Sunday Angelus. And it was today, March the 2nd, Ash Wednesday. He wants it to be the International Day of Prayer for Peace in Ukraine. He also wants it to be a day of fasting for Ukraine. Now, this immediately was welcomed across the world, particularly with Ukrainians, with Polish, and with leaders of other religions who have echoed Pope Francis's sentiment and asked the world to pray for the plight of the people. Again, the people that we met today trying to put on a brave face. It's hard to get across to you, Tracy, just what they were like. We saw children clutching their teddy bears, their toys, their pets, little dogs and cats who were frightened in the hustle and bustle of the huge crowds in the train stations. A lot of confusion in the air as well. But we also saw a lot of parents putting on brave faces in front of their children.
Well, Colm, thank you so much for your report, and please stay safe.
Thank you so much, Tracy.
And among those helping refugees from Ukraine is the Knights of Columbus. The Catholic fraternal group just announced that as of today, its Ukraine Solidarity Fund has raised nearly $800,000 and has provided more than $2 million in total assistance. And joining me now is Patrick Kelly, Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus. Supreme Knight Kelly, thank you so much for your time. We always appreciate it. Tell us a little bit more about this initiative and why it's so important.
Well, you know, Tracy, we have Knights of Columbus on both sides of the border, so in Ukraine and in Poland. And what we're seeing is a tremendous outpouring of support for Ukrainian refugees coming from their Polish brothers. It's really been extraordinary with the funds that we've been able to raise. We now have a truck that's going from eastern Poland into Lviv and dropping off supplies regularly. We've also set up what we're calling a mercy center right on the Polish border. So Ukrainian refugees come over, they cross the border, and they go to the mercy center, and they can spend some time there, get warmed up, get supplies, and from there, then they go to other areas in Poland. And it becomes kind of a pickup point, actually, for Poles to pick up Ukrainians and take them to their ultimate destination. So we're seeing a tremendous, I would say, fraternal spirit and brotherhood on the Polish side of the border with Ukraine. It really is kind of what Pope Francis is talking about today in his message.
Yeah, it really is incredible what you all are doing. I know we mentioned how much money has been raised so far. Can you tell us exactly how that money is being used and what type of items you're also distributing?
So it's being used primarily for medical supplies, for clothing, and for shelter and for food for refugees. And we have no overhead expenses. So every dollar given goes directly to refugees. If your viewers want to participate in this, what they have to do is go to kfc.org. That's the Knights of Columbus website, kfc.org. And there's a little button up on top, and they can push to make a donation to the Ukrainian Solidarity Fund. Yeah,
I'm sure a lot of people will be doing that. Also, something I want to mention in video remarks, you noted the organization called Knights for a reason. What exactly did you mean by that?
Well, the Knights of Columbus, from our very founding by Father McGivney, we were founded to serve the vulnerable, and we have done that throughout our history of 140 years. And the vulnerable take many shapes and sizes. And so right now we're seeing in Ukraine a tremendous vulnerability from these families in Ukraine who are under intense pressure, families with children who are trying to get to the Polish border, and we need to be there for them. So we feel very much that this effort, the Ukraine Solidarity Fund, is in keeping with our original vision. And really, it is a vision of Knights, of helping the vulnerable.
And before I let you go, any final thoughts on what we're seeing take place in Ukraine? And also, how long will this fund keep going?
Well, you know, what's going on in Ukraine is really a tragedy, and it's heartbreaking to see that, to see the human suffering on such a scale. And the fund that we have, we're going to continue this as long as there's a need. So, so I would just urge your viewers, if they want to participate. I know many of us feel helpless. What can we do to help Ukraine? And I think this Solidarity Fund that we've established is really a concrete way to help people. You go to kfc.org and you click the button up on top for the Ukraine Solidarity Fund.
Well, Supreme Knight Patrick Kelly, thank you so much for all that you're doing. Thank you for coming on and telling us about this initiative. God bless you.
Thank you, Tracy.
Well, EWTN News Nightly was able to ask President Joe Biden today about his support for abortion. And his first State of the Union speech last night, the president doubled down on his defense of Roe v. Wade. So when he left the White House today, White House correspondent Owen Jensen asked him about it. And Owen joins us now. Owen.
Tracy, good evening to you. When President Biden went to Wisconsin today to promote the bipartisan infrastructure law, as it turns out, as he was leaving the White House walking towards Marine One, I was able to shout some questions to him about Ukraine and Roe v. Wade.
Pope Francis is asking for prayers and fasting today for the people of Ukraine on this Ash Wednesday. Pope Francis is asking for prayers and fasting. What's your reaction to that, sir?
I think he's right. I was with the Cardinal this morning. He came over to give me ashes, and we both prayed for that, for the people of Ukraine.
And last night you continued to support Roe v. Wade. As a Catholic, why do you support abortion as a Catholic? Define church teaching.
I tell you what, I don't want to get in a debate with you on theology, but you know, well, anyway.
Why support abortion?
I'm not going to make a judgment for other people.
It was just last night during his State of the Union address, President Joe Biden, a Catholic, reaffirmed his support for Roe v. Wade. From day one of his administration, the president has sought to codify Roe into law, and he's pushed back against measures like the Texas heartbeat law.
Advancing liberty and justice also requires protecting the rights of women. The constitutional right affirmed by Roe v. Wade, standing precedent for half a century, is under attack as never before. If you want to go forward, not backwards, we must protect access to health care, preserve a woman's right to choose, and continue to advance maternal health care for all Americans.
Other reporters this morning asked the president what he's giving up for Lent, and he told them all sweets, including ice cream. At the Capitol, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Many Republicans were not impressed by the State of the Union address. Senator Bill Cassidy didn't think much of the president's pro-abortion message.
The president made a full-throated kind of, let's make sure we protect Roe v. Wade. Of course, the Supreme Court is sitting there in front of him. As a pro-life senator, I am disappointed in that, but it's what I expect from the leader of the Democratic Party.
And as EWTN News Nightly has reported, all previous pro-life and conscious protections have been included in the 2022 government spending bill. And joining me now is Vince Coglianese, Editorial Director of the Daily Caller. Vince, welcome back. So great to see you as always. First off, let's unpack President Biden's State of the Union speech. What was your overall impression of the address and also the tone?
I think he was trying to cleanse himself of the most radical elements of his party and to suggest that he is not to blame for the many crises that are going on domestically right now. And by that, I mean, he said things like, I'm a capitalist. He said, fund the police. He said, secure the border. He said, don't politicize COVID. These are not urgings to the American right. These are stiff arms to the American left. He's trying to separate himself and trying to convince the American public that he has mainstream views, that he's governing as a mainstream president, and that he has their best interests at heart. That is a very tall pitch to make, given that the economic consequences right now of the Biden administration are very much being felt. We've got inflation that we haven't seen in 40 years. We have a southern border that isn't really detectable with millions of people and certainly a lot of drugs coming across it. We've got crime going up in American cities. And we've got a president who doesn't have a good explanation for any of it. So last night was, as you often see from presidents, an attempt to put rose-colored glasses on the state of our country. But again, I think it was framing for Joe Biden. He was trying to push away from the extreme elements of his own party.
Yeah, and he started off the speech by admonishing Russian President Vladimir Putin's actions, but emphasized that we should not send troops to Ukraine. Do you think he struck the right balance there in dealing with Ukraine?
Well, I think, it's an interesting thing because this is a State of the Union address, and the first 10 minutes were the state of the former Soviet Union. It was all a focus on another country's problems. Now, that country very much involves U.S. interests, naturally, and as president of the United States, you would expect for him to talk about this. That those first 10 minutes, all devoted to that issue. I think what the White House saw was an opportunity here. Again, look at kind of the awful domestic picture I just described. This was a real opportunity for the president to kind of set the tone at the beginning and find a place where he could find wide agreement within that room. And you saw it when those cameras turned from the president to the people who were assembled there, both political parties standing in support of Ukraine as it tries to fend off Vladimir Putin's invasion.
Yeah, another thing we saw too, no masks. And President Biden touched on COVID and also talked about it being a dividing line. I want you to talk a little bit more about that and what you thought about that when he was speaking about COVID.
Well, this is something that we've seen coming for some time now. This is the president, the White House, they clearly need to be able to present something optimistic to the public. And so that optimistic message comes in the form of the relief of government restrictions on your life. Democrat governors across the country have actually led the way on this in recent weeks. All of these restrictions have been coming down, including right here in Washington, D.C., restrictions coming down just in advance of the State of the Union. And so there was a real difference between what we saw on Monday, where you're watching Joe Biden walk across the South Lawn from Marine One to the White House while wearing a mask, to being right there in the State of the Union. All the masks are off, and the image that they really want the American people to see is that they are living life, quote, normally. This is because Democrats are receiving a lot of guidance from their own consultants that Americans are sick and tired of these government restrictions and want to get past them. They're hoping that works to their benefit come the midterms.
Well, Vince, always great to get your input and analysis. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracy.
Coming up, coronavirus crisis, new developments in the fight against COVID-19. We have reaction from former Surgeon General Jerome Adams. Plus, moment for conversion, why Pope Francis says now is the perfect time to grow closer with God. President Joe Biden says COVID-19 will no longer control our lives. In his State of the Union address, the president laid out his plan to move past the pandemic while trying to prevent major outbreaks of variants in the future. And join me now is Dr. Jerome Adams, Executive Director of Health Equity Initiatives, Presidential Fellow and Distinguished Professor of Practice at Purdue University, and former U.S. Surgeon General. Dr. Adams, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Really good to be here with you.
Well, last night in his State of the Union address, President Biden laid out 4 criteria to move on from the pandemic, including vaccinations, preparing for new variants, preventing shutdowns of businesses and schools, and also vaccinations, as we mentioned. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I thought the president laid out a pathway forward that is really a roadmap for America. But one of the things that I think was lacking was a little bit more substance as to how we were going to engage to get people vaccinated and boosted. I want to remind folks that right now, especially in a world where fewer people are masking, the best protection we have against spread and against severe disease and death is vaccinations and boosting. Yet we have vaccination rates, adult vaccination rates, which are far below other wealthy nations, and booster rates, which are about half of the booster rates in much of Europe. So we've got a lot more work to do, particularly in that space.
Absolutely. And the president also mentioned not just vaccinating the U.S., but also the world. I want to get your thoughts on that and how it relates to health equity.
Well, health equity is about making sure everyone has the tools that they need to be able to make healthy choices. Unfortunately, many people around the country haven't had the luxury that we've had of being able to have 3 vaccines that are highly effective. It's a luxury to be able to say, I don't want to get vaccinated. And many places across the world don't have that. These variants are going to continue to pop up until we get most of the world sufficiently immunized. And so we aren't going to be done with the pandemic until we actually promote vaccine equity.
And another thing I want to turn to, an epidemic that's killing Americans, in particular teens, at an alarming rate, and that's the opioid epidemic being fueled by fentanyl. Can you talk to us about the seriousness of that and also what parents can do?
Well, I've been working with the Bipartisan Policy Committee to help Congress understand steps that they can take to help us respond to the epidemic. We know we saw a 30% increase in overdose deaths last year, a 40% increase among African Americans. They had the highest increase percentage-wise of any group. And we know that our First Nation, our Native American brothers and sisters, actually had the highest overdose rates overall of anyone. Truly tragic, in many cases because of fentanyl that's contaminating not only heroin, but also methamphetamine and other counterfeit pills out there. So to parents, talk to your children, talk to your teenagers, talk to your college students about the dangers of fentanyl. Make sure they understand that even a counterfeit pill that they think is something else could have fentanyl in it. And all it takes is one mistake and you could end up dead. You could end up in the morgue. We don't want that to happen to anyone. And as Surgeon General, I put out an advisory calling on all Americans to know about and be willing to carry naloxone, an opioid overdose reversal agent that really can help people if they do have a mistake, a slip up, to not let it be their last mistake that they've ever made.
Yeah, it is very, very concerning. Before we let you go, though, I want to talk about the book that you have that's coming out this summer. Can you quickly tell us about that?
Well, it's called Surviving COVID, and it's really about helping people understand that apart from the politics, apart from all the confusion out there, there are things that will help us live successfully with COVID. I actually like to make things simple. I think of MTV, masking, and we know that whether or not you're mandated, wearing a high-quality mask can still protect you even against new variants. Testing and treatment, and President Biden talked about making it easier for people to get tested and treated last night, and then vaccinations and boosters. So MTV, if we follow those things, we'll be able to live with COVID. As long as we continue to resist those things, we're going to continue to see new variants and new surges.
Well, Dr. Adams, great talking with you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. We've got the tools. We've got to use them. Let's work together.
Up next, how great works of art can inspire our journey toward Easter. Pope Francis reminds the faithful that Lent is an opportunity for conversion and interior changes.
Ma questo perdere tempo fortifica la famiglia umana.
At his weekly talk to pilgrims, the Holy Father said that we can become stronger and closer to God through prayer and by being kind to others. Pope Francis also appealed to the faithful to slow down during Lent and spend time with children and the elderly. In the Philippines, millions of Catholics were able to observe Ash Wednesday in person today for the first time in 2 years. These faithful were gathered to receive ashes at the Bacalaran National Shrine of Our Mother of Perpetual Help Church south of Manila. Many were glad that the Philippines government had relaxed coronavirus restrictions to allow their return to church. And as we begin Lent, we take a look at Bartolome Esteban Murillo's painting of the Return of the Prodigal Son. Not only represents the parable itself, but the deeper meaning of how even after we lose our way, God will rejoice when we return to him. And joining me now is Jem Sullivan, art historian and author of The Beauty of Faith. Jem, welcome back. So good to see you.
It's good to be back, Tracy. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Great to see you in person. Can you tell us a little bit more about the painter?
You know, on Ash Wednesday, the first reading at Mass invites us to return to the Lord, to return to God with our whole heart. This painting from the National Gallery is a visual catechesis on what it means to return to the Lord. What happens when we turn our gaze back to God? The painting is titled The Return of the Prodigal Son by the 17th century Spanish Baroque painter Bartolome Esteban Murillo. It's an example of what is called a simultaneous narrative, where we see all of the elements of this familiar parable of the prodigal son presented to us in one scene.
It is absolutely exquisite. It's so beautiful. What do you think this painting can teach us, especially as we enter this Lenten season?
So if we read the painting from left to right, we see on the left a young boy leading a fatted calf. This will become the feast for this family. Then on the right, we see a steward with a tray with fine clothes and a ring. These are symbols of the restored dignity of this prodigal son who's returning home. And then on the far right, we see the elder son who's not quite happy at this turn of events as his brother returns home. But Murillo really wants us to focus our gaze on the center of the action, which is the father and the prodigal son. The son kneels before his father, begging for forgiveness. And a little dog, symbol of faithfulness, fidelity, jumps up to greet him. His clothes are torn and tattered. His feet are dirty. He is a symbol of all of humanity, estranged, separated from God. And then the father leaning down to gently embrace his prodigal son and welcome him back into the family.
Yeah, it is so wonderful. We have a little less than a minute left, but wondering what more you can tell us about this beautiful painting. What else would you like our viewers to know?
Sure, Tracy. You know, the father's loving embrace of the prodigal son, which is at the center of Murillo's painting, is really an image of what happens to us when we return to the Lord. This is the invitation the church gives us in Lent. And as we journey from Ash Wednesday through Lent to Holy Week to Easter Sunday, we encounter again and again a God who is rich in mercy. And so like the prodigal son, I think our Lenten works of prayer and penance and fasting and almsgiving purifies us, restores our confidence to entrust ourselves to the embrace of a forgiving and merciful God.
Yeah, and Jem, thank you so much for coming on and sharing that with us and sharing this beautiful painting. We always appreciate it.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you, Jem. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.